The word of the day today is update. We are on Thursday. It's just been a couple of days since the release of patch 10.0.7. So, what time is it? It's time for overreaction. We're going to be taking a look at how the situation has been modified, has been changed by the balance tuning of this patch so far in the raid, because we do have quite a lot of changes compared to just a few days ago. Of course, in the next few days, things are bound to change, to stabilize. We're gonna see even more changes, but for now, we are taking a look at how the first few days of the new patch have impacted the situation in the raid. To understand the situation in the raid, we have to look at how the situation was just last week, right? As a comparison, this was the situation of last week. We pointed out about the two most recently buffed specs, which were Shadow Priest and Devastation Evoker. We still mentioned how the top half of the rankings for DPS was still heavily leaning towards melee DPS. As you see, most of the specs at the top right there are all melee. We mentioned how both of the warrior specs were doing quite well. 2 out of 3 of the rogue specs were also doing quite well. We also mentioned how the mage specs continued to do quite badly throughout the season. We also had the 3 warlock specs that did quite badly. For a while, demonology was doing quite well, and then over time, demon started sort of slowing down towards the bottom. So this was how we stopped last week before this patch. So 10.0.7 has come. Which changes can we see? Well, starting from the bottom, we do have just one change, and it's not the mages changing, because all of the mages are still chilling towards the bottom. As a matter of fact, they are even chilling lower down than they previously were in 10.0.5. The only worthwhile changes towards the bottom are that Elemental and Unholy Death Knight, which were previously towards the mid to top half of the meters, are currently leaning towards the bottom. So the mages are still there, and there does not seem to have been a significant change so far for them. Assassination Rogue is also towards the bottom. Enhancement Shaman is also still towards the bottom. However, Unholy and Elemental are kind of new entries so far towards the bottom half. Who also continues to be towards the bottom half without a surprise is also Balance Druid. However, there is also another orange spec down there, which wasn't down there previously, which is Feral Druid. Feral Druid was previously towards the top half, and now in these first few days of patch 10.0.7, they have sort of went the opposite way, towards the bottom half instead. Now, what is interesting about all these specs we have mentioned is, have they actually been touched by the balance tuning of 10.0.7? Have these specs actually been either buffed or nerfed in the patch notes? Well, mages, as we mentioned before, have been completely ignored in this patch, so they are not expected to do any better, basically, because nothing is changing for them. Elemental Shaman also has roughly been left alone. Surprisingly, Unholy Death Knight, which now is basically the third worst performing, has actually been very slightly buffed in these patch notes. Elemental Shaman also has not really been touched in this patch, yet it's doing significantly worse compared to last week, as well as Feral Druid. Feral Druid has also been slightly buffed, if anything, from patch 10.0.7. So, not really any significant, heavy buffs or heavy nerfs, with the specs towards the bottom heavily changing their performance. It might be just the fact that we don't have that many entries, that many kills in just a couple of days. We leave the bottom half and we start entering the middle of the pack. We do already have a few interesting changes. Windwalker Monk is roughly towards the middle again. What changes is Fury Warrior. Fury Warrior was in the top 5, top 4 even, last patch. Now it's actually in the middle. It's not performing nearly as well. Fury was not buffed or nerfed in patch 10.0.7. Fury was unchanged. The other significant change is Devastation Evoker, which is doing significantly worse than before, because before was in the top 5 and now it's something like 12th compared to last week, and also Devastation Evoker was not touched in patch 10.0.7 in terms of damage. Where we do start seeing what is going to be the biggest news of patch 10.0.7 is that right in the middle we have Destruction Warlock. So, Destruction Warlock right here, if you compare it to last week, to last patch, this was the even better than the best position of all of the Warlock specs last week, being Demo. And now the worst of the Warlock specs is better than the best of the Warlock specs in patch 10.0.5. This is also somewhat fitting because of the 3 Warlock specs, Destruction was the one that was buffed the least. It was buffed a bit, 3% more damage to all of the spells plus some general 3 buffs for Destruction, but Affliction and Demo received bigger buffs. Somewhat of a similar change we see when we move a little bit forward when we see Survival Hunter. So now the worst of the Hunter specs is just middle of the pack compared to last week where we had 2 of the Hunter specs being towards the bottom half. And that is also because the 3 Hunter specs have been buffed in patch 10.0.7. We do have a few specs jumping around. After this we have Havoc Demon Hunter, who is losing a few positions, but nothing major. We have the massive growth, somewhat expected, of Retribution Paladin, which used to be in the bottom 4 last week, and now it's towards the top 10 this week after their big rework in this patch. We also have Shadow Priest, which loses a few positions compared to the top 2 position they had last week. Shadow Priest was not touched by patch 10.0.7, so they have not been nerfed in any way. Now we are entering the top 8. So in the top 8, we have some familiar faces because we have Outlaw Rogue and we have Subtlety Rogue compared to last week. Those were still in the top 8. Those 2 rogue specs also have not been nerfed or buffed in patch 10.0.7, so they are continuing to do how they were doing before. Who is new in this clump is Beastmastery Hunter. What we also see is Arms Warrior. Unlike Fury, which has dropped down significantly, Arms is continuing to do more or less just as good as they were doing last week. Who is new in this whole clump of specs is Beastmastery Hunter and Frost Death Knight. Frost DK gains quite a few positions compared to last week. They were also buffed in 10.0.7, and as we mentioned, Beastmastery Hunter was also buffed in patch 10.0.7. So Beastmastery is the one that gains the most positions so far compared to last week. However, the actual title of most improved is going to go to 2 of our top 3 specs, because in the top 3 we have Demonology Warlock, Marksmanship Hunter, and Affliction Warlock. So Affliction Warlock was the 6th worst performing spec last week, Demo was middle of the pack, and now they are in the top 3. Marksmanship Hunter was already towards the top half, and now they have been buffed in patch 10.0.7, so their performance has improved accordingly. This is very surprising, because if you remember all of my bitching about how the top half of the raid rankings were always dominated by melee DPS for a long time, and now we have a top 3, which is exclusively made up of casters, of range DPS rather. Both of Affliction and Demo have been buffed, so is Marksmanship Hunter getting buffed in this patch, and these are currently the best performing specs given the first 2 days or so of logs that we have in Mythic. As expected, the popularity of the specs is also not changing too much besides the change of the performance. As you can see here, there is a massive growth of Red Paladin compared to last week. There is also a massive growth of Affliction Warlock compared to last week. Those are the 2 main changes when it comes to popularity, following up the growth in power of these specs. We can, however, besides the popularity of these specs, finish talking about the other thing, which is not, perhaps as important, because, many times you will hear people saying, oh, well, HPS for healers is not that relevant. It doesn't mean too much. It's much more complex to gauge the power of healers. etc, etc. But you might still see somewhat of a change when the HPS of patch 10.0.5 looked like this, and now the HPS of patch 10.0.7 looks like this. Well, there is a particular color in this graph which has dropped down to drastic, catastrophic levels, which is Preservation Evoker. We had been talking about the brutal nerfs happening in 10.0.7. It also slightly changes how you want to play, or how the mechanics of the specs work, so perhaps more Preservation Evokers are kind of still trying to figure out how to adapt to the nerfs. Maybe other Preservation Evokers are trying to change the spec to play, the Blossom build, so they are less effective at that as well in the first few days. But at the moment, we can definitely gauge a change from the nerfs given to Preservation Evoker in patch 10.0.7. As I said, these type of things are useful, not really for this season, not really for this patch. I mean, who cares if these specs are doing better now inside of Vault of the Incarnates, some 3+ months into the season. It's more relevant for the approaching season 2, for the approaching patch 10.1, to see who is getting in pole position, who is getting ready to be one of the favorite specs to become strong, to be one of the meta specs for the next season. That's what this could tell us as we continue to go deeper down this 10.0.7 patch. That is what we can see, and we will be able to see in the next few weeks of this patch as we wait for the release of patch 10.1. So we will continue to monitor the situation in the next few days and weeks to see how the situation will settle before the next season. So for now, this is all we can check on this Thursday. With this being said, we are starting our goodbyes by thanking all of my Patreon supporters for the contribution and the help to the growth of the channel. You can still, as usual, support in completely free ways. You can like and comment down below on this video, as well as subscribe to the channel itself, because such are the demands of YouTube. You can also support in other ways, like following me over on Twitter, as well as following me over on my stream on Twitch. With this out of the way, thank you guys again for watching. See you guys tomorrow, very likely, and in the meantime, I'm happy that some more range specs are doing better, but why did it have to be Warlock? Couldn't it be an Elemental Shaman, right? When's the last time it was OP?